For those of you that don't know me, my name is Barb Schmitz, and I live in Plummer, and I do safety consulting for counties, for school districts, for a few cities, and then I do some private industry as well. And I just had to do the math today because I was thinking, how long have I been doing safety? And I have been working in safety for 28 years. And it's so funny because I remember my old kind of colleague that I used to work with at the college, and remember he came into my office one day and he goes, you know, Barb, I have been doing safety for 18 years, and I just remember thinking, man, that guy needs to get a life. And here I am, but it goes fast when you're having fun, right? Well, what we're going to do today, we've got 3 hours that we're going to cover safety. We're going to cover a variety of topics. I will give you a break halfway through. So if you need to use the restroom, well, if you need to use the restroom in between our breaks, you can do that too. I don't mind. If you could just please silence your phones if you have your phones on you. The restrooms are right down the hall. There's a little sink there, so they're just to the left of the sink. What are the other things? Oh, our doors here, and the one you came in, if heaven forbid there should be an emergency when we're in here. They do not like you to bring food and beverages in the auditorium here, so if you could please refrain from doing that, that would be appreciated. So, yeah, with that, let's get started. How many of you guys this year, on or off the job, have suffered an injury? Anybody in here suffer an injury on or off the job? One? Some of us don't like to admit it, you know. Just one? Really? Two? Okay. Yeah. A lot of us just don't like to admit it, but anybody else have any close calls? Where it's like, ooh, I got away with one. You know, in my journeys as I do safety inspections and safety visits to employers, there were a lot of injuries last year because of our snow. A lot of people falling off roofs or ladders as they're cleaning the snow. A lot of them were pretty serious injuries. So we're going to talk about injuries today, and we're going to talk about our attitudes about safety. And I always start out with our attitudes about safety because it really is our attitude about safety that plays a huge part in whether or not we may have an injury on or off the job. So in addition to that, when we talk about safe attitudes, I'm going to talk about the 10 deadliest jobs that we have in the United States. And a lot of times people think those are like super dangerous jobs, you know. They're not. Well, some of them, I mean, obviously they're dangerous because they're the deadliest ones, but they're not necessarily the ones you think they are. And then we're also going to cover the 2018 Minnesota workplace fatalities. Those are the people who are just like you and me, and they came to work one day, and through their own unsafe act or the unsafe act of another person, did not get to go home at the end of the day. And so we're going to talk about those. In addition, and now those are the ones that I was referring to, that we always think that, you know, people get killed doing the really dangerous jobs. And that's not always the case. These people in our Minnesota OSHA report on fatalities were killed doing things that you and I might do every day. And so we need to look at the different things that happen out there. And then we have to cover the county's AWARE program, going through some safety rules, reporting injuries, that type of thing. Some of you are maintenance employees and you work with heavy equipment. And so one of the requirements that you have is lockout, tagout training. And so for office people, law enforcement people, that may have no interest to you whatsoever, but we still have to talk about it for the other guys. So we included that a little bit. We're going to talk about preventing slips, trips, and falls a little bit because that is the #1 cause of injury here at Polk County, and it has been for a number of years, and that is pretty common for other counties as well. We live in northern Minnesota. We walk on ice. We have slippery surfaces, so that's just a common thing. So we're going to talk about some things we can do to prevent those injuries. And then finally, for the annual type safety training that some of you have had for 28 years, we're going to put it into a kind of a game format. And so I'll split you into teams and we'll do a little bit of a game thing there. So I hope you guys enjoy the training. I hope if you have stories that you want to share as we're going through this, please feel free to do so. Or you want to talk to me after class, you got a question, please come up and do that as well. So we are going to start out with looking at the ladder of safety success. How many of you said you didn't have any injuries, so you guys must be right at the top of the ladder of safety success. The ladder of safety success is a measurement of your attitude about how you think about safety. How many of you would say that you are at the top of the ladder when it comes to your attitude about safety? Meaning, you're the safest person you know. How many of you guys are there? What? Nobody? Oh, we got one here. That's awesome. What makes you think you're the safest person you know? And you avoid risk, probably. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, for some of us, we might be at that top of the ladder. But I'm talking about where you are right now, where you think you are in your attitude about safety with the ladder as a measurement. Now, most of you would say, well, hello, Barb, I'm sitting at a safety training, can't get much more safer than that. But that's not what I'm talking about in general. Not where, your spouse thinks you are, but where you are with your attitude about safety. So most of you aren't the safest person you know. Well, apparently, I'm not there either. And I'm a safety consultant. So here's the story. In my defense, I did something really unsafe last year. In my defense, of which there really isn't any, here's the story. We were harvesting wheat last fall. Not this past August, but the August before. And my husband had told me to go get the old grain cart, which we rarely use anymore. We needed it for a little grain storage in the field. Go get it, drive it down to the end of the field. Okay, so I went and got it, drove it down to the end of the field. And my niece, 19 years old, she was driving tractor and grain cart for us that day. And she said, well, rather than you walk back to this end of the field, Aunt Barb, I'll go pick you up. And I thought that was just an awesome idea. And normally, I would climb into the cab of the tractor when I'm going to ride in the tractor. I mean, everybody knows you shouldn't ride on the steps of the tractor. Hello, that's a dangerous thing to do. And I would not normally do that. But this particular day, her boyfriend was riding in the tractor with her. And so that changes things a little bit. I didn't necessarily want to climb in the cab with the two of them. I mean, two's company and three's a crowd. I didn't want to be the, third wheel or whatever, and there's not that much room in the cab. So I told them when she said, come on into the tractor, I said, no, that's okay. I'll just stand on the step and ride across the field. And she looks at me and she goes, you know that is not a safe place to go. And I'm like, I know, I'll be fine. Well, that was before I knew she was going to put the tractor in high gear and tear across the field, hitting every depression and rock in the field. And as I'm jostling down the end of the field, I'm finally thinking, okay, this is not safe. I feel like I'm going to fall off. So I look in and I knock on the door to the cab to be asked to be admitted into the love nest. And I look up and I find her driving the tractor with her knee, with her cell phone in hand, taking a picture of me, which she probably posted to Facebook, tagged me in it, and said, when the safety lady, when the safety lady tells you she will just ride on the steps of the tractor across the field. Now that is not, if you're a safety person, what you necessarily want to have tagged on you on Facebook, because then the comments started to come in and it's like, oh my gosh. So, when you're a safety person, you do something unsafe, you can't ever get away with it. And yeah, I used to love her like a daughter, but maybe not so much anymore. But anyway, so obviously I wasn't at the top of my game that day either. And maybe you're not at the top of your ladder either. Maybe you're one of those ones that, my safety attitude is pretty good. I follow safety rules most of the time. I wear my personal protective equipment most of the time. At work, I'm usually safe because my boss is there. Or maybe you're one that complies with safety rules, but you complain about it a lot. That safety, it's fine, but it takes time and it costs money and I'm going to complain about it. Maybe you clean up your work area, but only when the safety inspector's coming in. Or you hide things when the safety inspector's coming in. Or you do things that are quick because it's just going to take a minute. Or maybe you work safely at work and then you go home and it's a free-for-all. That would be, how many of you would say you're at the middle of the ladder? How many of you would say you're there? Okay, a few of you. Do you mean to tell me the rest of you are at the bottom of the ladder? This person's, I would say, at the middle of the ladder. She's got her hearing protection, but she's not wearing it. You see it? It's out of her ear. Your hearing protection can't protect you if it's out of your ear. But she's wearing it because the supervisor is walking around and you've got to have your ear protection on in this area where there's high noise. But her neighbor was speaking to her. And so she pulls it out to hear what her neighbor has to say and she doesn't put it back in. The rest of you might be here, Trust me, this guy is not on the top of the ladder when it comes to his safety attitude. But we do these things. We don't want to get a taller ladder. We just, use what we got. And oh well, here we got the guy not using the step ladder at all because he's just got the chair, the one with wheels, that's real handy for him. So, but if you're at the bottom of the ladder, those are what we call the master of disaster. And the best thing about being at the bottom of the safety ladder is really you only got one place to go. And hopefully that's up. Hopefully we don't have too many people here, but I think you guys all know somebody that's at the bottom of the ladder when it comes to safety success. They're a risk taker extraordinaire. They're not the safest tool in the drawer. They find all kinds of creative ways. You see these pictures everywhere. All kinds of creative ways to do the job, except perhaps the safe way to do the job. Little jam on the wood chipper, But you could say, okay, Barb, I'm not that dumb. I would never do anything that unsafe, I wear my high visibility vest. But I want you to look at that picture and I want you to think about that. There he is under a very heavy slab of concrete. What happens if that cable breaks? It's coming down right on top of him, and he's going to be our next Minnesota OSHA fatality. Okay? Safety harness of the year. Apparently, training was a little lax on this one. But we work as a team. We look out for each other. We do teamwork. And we look at these pictures and we kind of laugh, but do we really think about what could happen if? And I just want to remind you guys, safety matters. And I know you wouldn't do any of the dumb stuff that I showed you. You guys follow safety rules, right? You guys wear personal protective equipment when it's required, right? You guys would never dream of pulling out your phone when you're driving and reading a text or sending a quick message, right? Maybe not. You pick up after yourselves. You don't leave things on the floor for other people to trip on. You close file cabinets. You guys are a model of safety excellence on the job. But what do you do when you go home and the right equipment isn't available or is handy? You don't have a tall enough ladder. What do you do then? You do this, right? We do the job anyway. And then we somehow think that if we do unsafe things off the job, nothing's going to happen. And that's definitely not the case. What's wrong with this picture? here we've got, this came from one of my shop teachers, sent me this picture. And a buddy of it sent it to him. He was building a shop. And this is the electrician that is out there. And he's not using an aerial lift, not using a towel and a flatter. He's just using what he has, which so many of us do. And we justify and we make a mistake or an excuse. So here he's got the forklift fully extended. He's got a pallet on the forklift. He's got the 6 or 8 foot step ladder on the edge of the pallet. And there he is up on top. What is going to happen if he shifts his weight a little bit one way or another and the leg of that ladder falls off that pallet? What's going to happen? He's going to fall. And what he falls on is just the luck of the draw. He could fall on his head and be killed, or a quadriplegic, or a traumatic brain injury person for the rest of his life. Why do we do these things? Because we don't think that anything is ever going to happen to us. But it won't happen to me. We don't ever think a serious injury is going to happen to us. And we tell ourselves, you know, Barb, I don't work with dangerous equipment. I don't work at heights. I don't work with hazardous chemicals. I don't work with energized electricity. And maybe you don't work with all of those things. We work in an office. We work in a maintenance shop. We work in a government building, or we work in a school, and all of those places are really safe places. Well, let me ask you, how many of you drive? What is the number one cause of work-related fatality? Motor vehicle crashes. How many of you walk? All of you walked in here today. Slips, trips, and falls are the number 2 cause of work-related death. And they don't need to be falls from high surfaces. Same level falls kill people. And how many of you guys work with the public? You all do. The number 3 cause of work-related death is violence in the workplace. You guys in your safe jobs meet the top 3 criteria for most danger, what kills the most of our employees. And I want you to think about that. But yet we persist in thinking it won't happen to me. Kind of like Alex Sanders. Here he is, all smiles after he went skydiving with his brother about 5 years ago. A few years ago, the 27-year-old was working for his dad doing maintenance at some apartment buildings that his father owned. And he decided he wanted to try something different. So he went and he got a job at the Menards store in Burnsville as a forklift operator. And lo and behold, he loved this job. He loved the people he worked with. He loved the customers in the store. He loved his job so much that he would call in on his day off and see if the store needed any help. I know, it's an anomaly for a 27-year-old to do that. And then the morning of May 5th, 2017 came, and it was just a common, ordinary day. And Alex was driving the forklift in the yard of the store like he had done countless times before. Only this particular day, he had on a load of 16-foot-long 2x4s, and he was traveling with the load elevated up in the air. And when he rounded a corner, the stack of lumber he hit another stack of lumber, causing the forklift to start leaning. And he jumped off. And unfortunately, the forklift cage caught him across the chest, crushing his chest. And he died on the way to the hospital. Alec made a couple critical mistakes that day. Number 1, he failed to put his seatbelt on. You see, there's a law for forklift operators, a safety rule for forklift operators, that you have to wear a seatbelt whenever you're operating the forklift. And if you've ever operated a forklift, or you've ever seen them operated, those guys are on and off their forklifts quite a bit. And so after a while, they become pretty slack about putting that seatbelt on. But the reason you want to wear a seatbelt is in the event that the forklift tips over, the seatbelt keeps you in the safety cage. If you're not wearing it, exactly what happened to Alex would happen to you. You get thrown and the cage comes and crushes you and kills you. Another fatal mistake or critical mistake he made was he was carrying the load too high. Anytime you're carrying a load, it needs to be as low to the ground as possible. Because if you're carrying it high, your forklift is very unstable. And that's what caused it to tip. And his third mistake is he attempted to jump off rather than stay within the protective structure. And I have to wonder, no doubt that Alec received training on forklift operation. Menards is a very large organization, and you were required to go through training and licensing and all that type of stuff before you can operate a forklift. No doubt he had had training. But then I have to wonder, did they discuss the need to wear seatbelts? Did they discuss the need that you have to carry your loads low? And had anyone observed his driving skills? Had anybody seen him, a supervisor, a co-worker, a fellow forklift driver, had anybody seen him not wearing his seatbelt? Had anybody seen him carrying loads too high? Had anybody seen him and addressed that? Because had they, perhaps that wouldn't have happened. Instead, he made OSHA's list of fatalities for that year. Oftentimes, we always think that, nope, no way, not going to happen to me. And we give ourselves too much credit. We think we're safer than we actually are. I mean, seriously, how many of us would consciously admit to doing unsafe things on a regular basis, making unsafe choices? How many of us think we're going to be injured or killed this year committing an unsafe act, or be injured or killed by somebody else's unsafe act? We don't think that because it's not even on our horizon. And I bet one of the highway department guys I trained last year didn't think that either when he drove his four-wheeler home on graduation night and rolled it. I had just talked to this, I just done their training back in March, April, and I remember this employee coming up and we talked about safety. He was probably in his late 40s. And he came up after class and he just kind of thanked me for the training, but he also said, the older I get, I used to do stupid stuff when I was young. Oh, hello. But he said, since I've gotten older, I really started realizing that it's not worth it. And we need to follow safety rules and we need to take good care of ourselves. And we got people around us that care for us and they love us. And we want to be around. I'm like, bingo, you got it. Graduation night, which had been 2 months later, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we live on a farm about 1.5 miles out of town, out of Plummer, and all of a sudden you hear the siren go, and your heart stops, because you just know that it's an accident. And so, first thing I do is pull out my phone and start texting my niece and my nephew. I knew my kids weren't around, but my niece and my nephew, I'm like, are you guys okay? And it was the next morning that I found out that it was James coming home from that graduation party, riding his four-wheeler. He was half a block from his house when he canned the four-wheeler, gave it a little extra gas. It had real knobby tires on it, and it caused it to grab, and it caused it to tip over backwards, and he didn't have a helmet on, and he hit his head on the tar road, and it killed him. When we talked at safety training that year, just 2 months before, never in his dreams did he think that that could actually happen to him. But bad things can and do happen when we do things that are unsafe. On last March, I was training at one of my counties, and I asked, just like I asked you guys, anybody have any injuries? And nobody raised their hand, but 3/4 of the class turned and looked at this one lady. And I'm like, okay, and she doesn't want to admit it, so we're not going to say anything. And I got home that night, and I had an email in my inbox. And it was from this woman, and she said, I'm the person that everybody turned and looked at when you asked if anybody had had an injury. And I wasn't comfortable sharing it with the whole group, but I need to tell you what happened. And she said she worked for social services, and on December 10th, she was going to do errands on her lunch hour. And she saw a patch of ice on the sidewalk, and she literally told herself, I should walk around this patch of ice. And she did like so many of us do. Well, I'll just be careful. I'll just pay attention. I'll walk slow. And she said, the next thing she knew, she just heard this loud crack, and she was out of it. And she said, when I came to, I was lying on the sidewalk. I didn't know what had happened. I was very confused, couldn't figure out what the problem was, but I knew that I needed to get back into the office because I was very cold. Well, she had slipped on that ice, and she had cracked the back of her head on the sidewalk. And she said, I went into the office, told a coworker I fell. She found a manager who brought me to the hospital where I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. For several weeks following the incident, I didn't have good motor skills or speaking ability. I could tell my brain wasn't working in the same way it used to, but I couldn't fathom all that was happening to me. She said, I remember a few days after the incident, I needed a shower, and I was aware that my legs couldn't hold me, and I was terrified of falling. So I sat in the tub to take a bath, the empty tub, facing the wrong way. She said, I struggled to figure out how to take a bath, something as simple as that, and then how to even get dressed again. I'm not normally an emotional woman, she said, but these days there are a lot of tears. I have missed all of my granddaughter's dance recitals. My husband gets exhausted taking care of me in our home in addition to a full-time job. Most of my energy goes to trying to appear normal while I get exhausted trying to do little tasks. I now work a 4-hour day. I get home, I go to sleep at 6 o'clock in the evening in order to have enough brain power to go to work the next day and work a 4-hour work shift. I had no idea that a little slip on the ice could do this to a person. It's a very vulnerable feeling knowing that your brain isn't working right, and it's very isolating because I can't visit with people much because the sounds hurt my head, and because people approach me with the assumption that I have a working brain. She looks normal, but she's got this injury to her brain. She said, I recalled I used to be able to do a lot of things. I used to play concert piano and chase the grandkids around, and I love their squeals of delight. And now I'm the grandma they have to be quiet around because I can't handle noise. I'm fortunate, she said. I've never had a concussion before, so the doctor says I can expect a full recovery in 6 to 12 months. It could have been worse, so I try to be thankful, but every day is a struggle. Just before I slipped, I thought about going around the ice, but decided on being careful. I regret this decision to this day. Such a simple thing, such a serious injury. She told me her story in March. It was a full month later, and she emailed me to let me know that she was doing better, and she was now up to 5-hour days and going to bed at 7 o'clock at night. And she emailed me again in July, which would be 6 months after, and she said she was working full-time and doing better. Just how an injury can affect your life. So bad things can and do happen when we fail to plan. When we don't plan safety into what we're going to do. When we fail to establish good work habits, when we fail to hold ourselves and others accountable for our actions, and when we fail to speak up. You know, didn't go back. In her case, she talks about having that thought, I should go around. How many of us have had a thought that, you know, I shouldn't do this, or I should check on something? This makes me uncomfortable. It's that little whisper in your ear. It's almost a subconscious thing, and we ignore it. Don't ignore that. That is your guardian angel sitting on your shoulder saying, don't do this. She said, had I just gone around, it would have taken me an extra couple minutes to do it. And you know what? It would have saved me all that pain and all that burden that she went through. So, why don't we speak up? When we see somebody doing something unsafe, like that gentleman on the forklift, why don't we speak up? We see somebody doing something unsafe. What do we do? What do you do when you see somebody doing something really unsafe? We laugh. Or what else do? We pull out our cameras, don't we? Hello? We want to pull out our camera, take a picture of them doing this unsafe act, put it on Facebook like my niece. No. But we do that, and we don't really think that anything is going to happen. We laugh, we point it out to someone else, but the one thing we don't do is what we ought to do is say something to them. Why do we find it so hard to speak up? Well, one of the reasons is we don't really believe anything is going to happen. You see someone standing on that chair with wheels, and you know what? You don't say anything because, you know what? You've done the same thing, and nothing ever happened. We start thinking that nothing ever will happen. We have life experience that says nothing's going to happen, but we all know that it only takes once, right? What would you think if you saw someone standing on the top of the ladder and you knew for a fact that if that person falls, he's going to die? Would you get up and say anything? Absolutely, we would say that. Absolutely, we'd go over. But the problem is we don't get to know ahead of time the type of injury that he's going to suffer. Do you think that if anybody at that graduation party knew that James was going to get killed that night, do you not think that someone would have said, I'm going to bring you home? Do you not think that somebody would have said, put a helmet on? Yes. But we don't, because we don't know what's going to happen ahead of time. We assume that that person knows the risk or the danger. And maybe they do, and they're ignoring it. But maybe they're distracted. Maybe they've overlooked a safety rule. So I want you to think about, you're out you're visiting your daughter, and you're standing in the front yard, and there's her husband and your daughter and your 3-year-old granddaughter. And suddenly, your 3-year-old granddaughter goes running towards the street. Now, how many of you are going to stand back and say, well, there's little Lauren. She's running to the street. She knows that she's supposed to stop. Her parents have told her multiple times that she's going to stop. She needs to stop. She'll stop when she gets to the curb. How many of us are going to say that? There's not one of us that are going to say that. We are going to run after that little girl, and we're going to grab her by the collar and drag her back. Because we don't know that she's going to remember that. But yet we don't do that for other people. And then we've got indifference. It's not my business. I don't want to get involved. Oh, they won't appreciate my advice anyway. And to this I want to tell you, just stop. This is the problem with our world today. Nobody wants to get involved. Nobody wants to say anything. And ask yourself, if that were your son and your daughter doing something unsafe, would you not want someone to stand up and say something to them? to look out for their safety. Well, today that person is you. And then it's uncomfortable. Absolutely. Believe me, I do enough safety inspections and I see people not wearing personal protective equipment. I know it's uncomfortable to have to go up and say, hey, do you want to put your safety glasses on? Or how come you're not wearing this? Or how come the guard's off the machine? I know that's uncomfortable. And maybe sometimes fear even plays a role. What if they think I'm a jerk? What if they tell me to mind my own business? What happens if, God forbid, I get into a confrontation with this person and we avoid it? Maybe we've even tried a couple times to tell somebody to do something in a more safe manner and we got shot down with a snippet remark. But again, I want to ask you how uncomfortable it's going to be living with yourself if you knew you had the power to say something to someone to prevent them to do an unsafe act and you didn't. So how do we speak up? Well, I always like to say, be a safety coach, not a safety cop. And what I mean there is you aren't there to criticize them. You are out there to convince them to work safely. And that takes empathy, it takes persuasion. And often when someone doesn't accept safety advice, it's because nobody's really given them a good reason why. They've never really explained it. When I go into schools, and I don't do their safety training like I do for you guys, they have someone else, another consultant to do it, so I do it more as an auditing role. And when I go in, now it's been 20 years, I've been working with schools, and I find so many of the same things over and over and over again. And they're not real serious things, they're just minor little things, some fire code violations or some electrical violations. And finally, I asked the superintendent, I said, can I just come in and talk to your people? Because you know what they're doing when I walk in? They're trying to hide things. And I said, we're all on the same page, but I said, nobody's ever told them why they can't do this. You know what I mean? Why? I like to know, why is it that I have to do this way? Why do I have to wear personal protective equipment this style? And I think when people know the reason why, they understand it. Another thing we can do is demonstrate care and concern. I'm concerned that you're not wearing your personal protective equipment. Why aren't you? Well, I had one guy one time, he never wore his safety glasses. He hated wearing them. Finally, I'm like, has anybody ever asked you why? Or I asked the supervisor, has anybody asked him why? And he goes, oh, I don't know, he's just supposed to wear them. So I went up to him and I'm like, Mike, why don't you like wearing your safety glasses? And he goes, because they always slide down my nose. I get sweaty and they're always at the end of my nose, and I'm like, they don't fit you right. There's all kinds of sizes and styles. I told his supervisor, order up different pairs, let him try them on, let him pick the ones he likes. That's the reason he wasn't wearing them. It wasn't that he didn't want to comply with a rule, it's that he wasn't comfortable with it. Just talk to people. But with the care and concern one, what happens if a person responds negatively when you try and give safety advice? What happens if someone says, just get out of here. I need to get this job done. I don't need to listen to you. What do you think I am, stupid? And you're going to walk away and think, your funeral, bud. Yeah, you are stupid. We might think that, but what happens if we give them the benefit of the doubt? What happens if we say, he's having a tough day? What happens if we say, it's not about me and how he made me feel. It's about him. People don't walk around with a sign on their head that says, I'm having a biopsy today. They don't walk around with a sign on their head that says, my son's doing drugs. Stage 4 cancer. Miscarried my 3rd child today. My divorce became final today. I'm putting mom in a nursing home. People don't walk around with those signs. It's amazing the pain that people are carrying around, and they don't want anybody to know. They try and pretend that everything is normal, and we don't think it's affecting them. and we don't think it's affecting the safety choices that they make, it is. Instead, we try to walk around pretending as if everything's okay, and it's not. And sometimes that sadness, that grief, that regret, that anxiety comes out as a snarky remark, a negative comment, an unsafe act. Maybe instead of taking those responses to heart and getting our knickers in a twist, maybe we should just be kind and try and make their day a little better, and try and point out that I'm concerned about your safety. I'm concerned about the choices you're making. What can we do so that you make better choices? And then the easiest way to look out for one another is to give permission one-on-one. Law enforcement, you guys, nobody has a tougher job, a harder job, a more dangerous job than you guys have. And you have to make quick decisions sometimes. What would it be if one of you guys looked to your partner and said, you know, there's going to be times when I'm going to be in a hurry, I'm going to be, not thinking. Would you just remind me, if you see me doing something unsafe, would you remind me to do it better? Would you remind me to put on my safety equipment? When you give someone that permission, the next time you see them doing something unsafe, you just need to remind them. It's much easier, it makes it easier for them to be able to say that. And then remember that. Thank you. I appreciate that you did that. You might not feel like it at the time, but go back and always thank them for that. So how do we measure success in a safety program? The employers that I work with, so often they'll say, you know what, Barb, we have a great safety program because we don't have any injuries. Well, you might have a great safety program, or you might have had a lucky year. Low to no injuries is not always an indicator of how good your safety program is. Not always the best indicator. Employee participation. I have employers that say, you know what, Barb, we get 100% attendance at safety training. We have got a successful safety program. Well, you guys got pretty good attendance this year. I counted on the sign-up sheet. You got like 257 employees signed up for training. That's awesome. Now, how many of you are here because it's mandatory? Everybody's hand goes up in the air. You know what I consider success? A few years ago, I was doing training. It was here. And one lady walks in and she goes, hey, Barb, I'm going to retire in 3 weeks. And I'm like, that's awesome. Good for you. And then I kind of like stopped and I'm like, so why are you here? Because you don't have to come to safety training this year if you're going to retire in 3 weeks. And she said, because I love the stories and I always learn something new. That's a success. When you get someone that wants to come to training. Changed attitudes. One attitude changed at a time. One person wearing their seatbelt that didn't wear their seatbelt last year. One person making a pact with themselves not to text and drive. One person having a changed safety attitude is a success. People reporting near misses, unsafe conditions, and injuries. We want you to report that because that way we can address them. If we get people who don't report these things, how can we address them? And those situations stay there for another unsuspecting person to come along and be injured. People sharing stories of accidents and injuries. When you can do that with one another, that's huge. That's why I tell so many stories. It's not the OSHA rule and reg that you're going to remember, but you know what? You're going to remember the story about the gal who slept on the ice the next time you want to walk around a patch of ice. And people looking out for one another is huge. So figure out where you were on your safety ladder of success and how can you get a rung higher. Well, the way we do that, number one, is you need to know yourself and you need to know what your triggers are for doing something unsafe because we are all tempted to do something unsafe. My trigger for riding on the step of the tractor was being uncomfortable with going into the love nest. But when we're tired or fatigued, we're tempted to do something unsafe. When we're in a hurry, when we're distracted, or we're upset, we're angry, we're lazy, we're under the influence of our emotions. When we're unsure, we're not well trained, we become complacent. Or maybe past experience has let us get away with something unsafe. So those, know your trigger. Another tip is you have to stay focused and avoid those interruptions, those distractions, because those cause a significant number of injuries. Be consistent in developing your good, safe habits. You know, nobody starts out wearing the seatbelt for the first time and does it every time from there on in. They start doing it on a regular basis, maybe not all the time, but eventually they get to where they don't even think about putting it on. It's just something they do. And never change the goal. And the goal of safety is that you go home in the same shape, the same condition that you came to work in. It's as simple as that. Here we've got a young man that was using a handheld grinder, and the grinding wheel blew apart, which actually happens quite a bit. I mean, it's a common thing that happens. And his blew apart, and it flew into his safety glasses and lodged there. And he is not sporting a glass eye because he had his safety glasses on that day. Now, I would have preferred that you also have a face shield on. And I always tell that's actually required to have a face shield in addition to eye protection. Because had that wheel hit him a few inches lower, you know, he'd have a nice laceration across his face. Maybe some missing teeth. But he is not sporting a glass eye because he had his safety glasses on. And when he went on break, after this happened, everybody was talking about it, one of his coworkers asked him, you know what? I bet you're really glad you had your safety glasses on today. And you know what he said? He said, you know what? I don't actually even remember putting them on. It's just something I do every day I come to work. Bingo. He gets the prize. It was a habit for him. It wasn't something that required thought. And on this particular day, this random day, this day like any other day, something went wrong and he was protected. And he goes home in the same way he came to work, with his eyes. You need to be committed. Be committed to working safely. And that's where we don't give ourselves an excuse for working in an unsafe manner. Be of good character. A lot of you in here aren't supervisors, but you know what? You still lead. You still lead by your word and by your example. I was invited last June to do a training at a large school district. And once a year, they pull in their maintenance staff in the summer, and it was 80 to 100 maintenance guys, groundskeepers and custodial staff. And, you know, I have to admit, I was a little bit pumped about this training because I have trained you guys for 28 years, and I have never trained them. And so I have fresh blood before me. These guys hadn't heard any of my stories, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to tell them? What story? What picture am I going to show? And anyway, it's kind of sad actually, but anyway, I was pumped, I was excited. And when I got there, the safety director was in the auditorium, and all the guys were walking in and they were chit-chatting with each other. And the safety director said, you know, Barb, I'm going to have you on second, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to say a few words and I'm going to show a video, and then you'll get up on the stage. And I'm like, perfect, sounds great. So as the guys came in, signed in, and sat down, the safety director got up there, and the first thing he did is apologize that they had to come to safety training. Apologized. And then he proceeded to say that I'm going to put in a right to know training video, but you know, you guys, it's really boring, so if you need to take a nap, now's your time to do so. And I'm like, why are we showing a boring training video? We don't do that. And I'll tell you, the energy sucked right out of the room. And I looked around, and yeah, guys were sleeping. They were, you know, getting up, walking out, probably not coming back. And I'm like, that's not how we treat safety. We have to be passionate about safety. We have to realize your time in front of me today is valuable. There's a lot of money sitting in this room. And if I can't get you guys fired up and thinking about safety, I am not doing my job. And now, the safety director is a great guy, but he should not be safety director because that is not his priority. That is not his passion. He can't relate to the people in that way. And he makes it seem like it's not important. And then, finally, be a safety evangelizer. An evangelizer is somebody who so believes in what they're doing, what they're saying, that they can't help but not want other people to have it. So a few years ago, I told you guys the story about Alan. And Alan was a city maintenance worker for one of my clients. And he had attended training for many years. And it was his last year. He was retiring that year. And he came to training. And at break, he came up and he goes, you know, Barb, when I first started coming to safety, I just thought, just to comply with OSHA, not a big deal. And he said, it's changed over the years. And he goes, I just want to let you know that it does make a difference. And he proceeded to tell me how the fall before he had been helping a beet farmer with harvest. He had been driving truck. And the beet farmer he was working with, he had pulled a truck out into the field, and the truck was having trouble with the hoist, the box, raising and lowering. And so it was stuck up in the air. And the farmer was getting ready to reach in between the frame and the hoist, the box of the truck, to make an adjustment. And you never do that because it's a very dangerous thing to do. Because if you adjust the hydraulics there, the box can come down quickly and slam you and crush you. And Alan stepped up and he told this farmer, hey, I'm not going to let you do that. And the farmer turns around and looks at him and he goes, and just how are you going to stop me? Remember when I talked about, you know, how people respond, especially when they're in a hurry, they're upset about things. Anyway, Alan just stepped back and he goes, you remember those 3 daughters you were telling me about and how much they meant to you? I want you to think about them before you do what I think you're going to do. And you know what? The farmer went, and he crawled underneath the tractor, or the truck, and made the adjustment there. So if the box did come down, it wasn't going to crush him. And then when they were done with harvest that year, and the farmer had a party for all of his truck drivers and his helpers, and Alan walked in that evening, the farmer greeted him at the door, and he said, I just want to thank you. And Alan's like, no, I just enjoy driving truck and whatnot. And he goes, no, I want to thank you for what you said to me out in the field that day. Because I think about that a lot now. And it usually helps me make a safer choice. Alan found a reason, a way to be a safety evangelizer. Well, I told that story to all the groups that I trained that year. And the last group I trained for the year, I told them the story, gave them a break, and one of the guys walked to the back of the room, and I was grabbing a cup of coffee, so I went back there and I was chatting with them. And in a very quiet voice, he says, you know that story you just told? I'm like, yeah. Years ago, I was an EMT, and we got a call to go out on an accident scene exactly like you described. Only the box had come down and had crushed the man. And his 7-year-old son made the 911 call. I will never forget that call, he told me. And I often wonder how that young boy is doing today. The hell that we put people through when we do things that are unsafe. Because safety always comes with a cost, or unsafe acts always come with a cost. And usually they're very heavy. And they're paid for by ourselves, our loved ones, our family members. And we need to think about those things. So a hero is a person admired for outstanding achievements, noble qualities, and a person who shows great courage. And in my mind, Alan that day in the field with that farmer was a hero. Heroic behavior doesn't just happen, though. It's taught. It's cultivated. And when I think of heroes, I think of these 2 guys, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart. Do any of those names ring a bell? We've forgotten them already. Bingo, exactly. They were part of America's most elite operating forces called a Special Ops Unit known as Delta Force. And they were featured in the movie Black Hawk Down. If you remember in 1993, there was a civil war that was raging in Somalia. And the United States got involved in a peacekeeping mission. What was happening is the warlords in Somalia were causing civil unrest in the country, and peacekeeping associations were trying to get supplies into the people who were starving, food, medical supplies, that type of thing. Unfortunately, the warlords were confiscating it, and it wasn't getting to the people. So the United States got involved as a peacekeeping mission. And they had about 2 months of success, bringing some stability to Mogadishu, which is Somalia's capital city. And we had captured 26 of the Somalian warlords. But in the middle of the afternoon on October 3rd of 1993, things went bad. A company of U.S. Rangers, accompanied by the Delta Force, were about to descend on a gathering of warlords. And there was one of the warlords had made a very specific threat against the United States. And so the plan of action that day was for the Delta Force group and the Rangers to go in and do a simple extrication of 2 of their top lieutenants. So the Rangers were supposed to put up a perimeter, set up a perimeter around a city-wide block, while the Delta Force guys went in to storm the target house. But things turned out to be a little more complicated. The Rangers got separated and injured, and ultimately they were pinned down and surrounded by Somalia militia. And as the course of the events unfolded, helicopters and their pilots continued to return to the scene to provide whatever direction, whatever firepower they could from the air. And one Black Hawk helicopter went down, and everybody on board was killed. And a second Black Hawk helicopter, piloted by a guy named Mike Durant, also crashed. And he and his 3 crew members were injured severely. And these 2 guys, Delta Force snipers, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Sugar, requested permission to drop down to Mike Durant's location and to provide him with whatever assistance they could. 3 or 4 times Gary and Randy made that urgent request to headquarters. And headquarters responded, "Do you know what you're asking? Do you realize that if you get dropped in there, you're in the middle of a firefight, and you're going to be completely surrounded and completely cut off from any type of assistance whatsoever? Do you realize that?" And they both said, "Yes, we do," and requested permission to go in anyway. And finally, their commanders agreed to what they surely thought was a suicide mission. And Gary and Randy went in, and they dropped in, and in the face of incredible odds, they killed an undetermined number of Somalian militia before running out of ammunition. And they were ultimately killed by the militia. And their bodies were hacked to pieces and paraded through the streets of Mogadishu. Mike Durant, the pilot on the Black Hawk helicopter, was the only one who survived. And he was beaten severely, and he was imprisoned for quite a while, kept hostage. And he was eventually released. And if you don't know the rest of the story, you can read it in The Company of Heroes by Mike Durant. It's a book. But eventually he was released and sent back to the U.S., and both Randy and Gary received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military medal you can get for sacrifice, heroic sacrifice, to go against all odds to go in and protect one of their own. They received that posthumously for their bravery and self-sacrifice. Mike Durant was asked to go to Gary Gordon's hometown to present his family with the Medal of Honor, and Mike was honored to do so. But when he got to the hometown, he discovered that what he thought would be a small gathering of family was a community-wide event. Gary Gordon was well loved in his hometown. And Mike Durant was a little nervous because he was not a public speaker. And so he decided he would go to the local library and he would check out a book on the Medal of Honor so he could learn more about the medal as part of his speech. So he went to the library, and in that entire library, there was one book on the Medal of Honor. And he checked it out, and he sat down at the table, and he read story after story after story of the brave men and women who received that Medal of Honor. The brave steps they took, the heroic steps, the self-sacrifice they made. This book was full of stories of soldiers who had given their very lives for others. You know, we live in a world today where people mock bravery. They mock virtue. It's not important. People ridicule virtuous choices, and they don't understand heroic sacrifice. And in this entire book, there was not one word that mocked bravery and heroic sacrifice. So as Mike flipped to the pages and read the stories, he got to the back of the book. And if you remember, back in the old days of getting a library book, there was a little envelope on the back page or the back cover, and there was a little index card that you'd have to have in there, and that index card was stamped with the date that the book had to be returned by and the name of the person who had the book. And the last person to check that book out had been 20 years before. And it was checked out by a little boy named Gary Gordon. What are the chances? Heroic sacrifice, bravery, heroes are something that we learn. They're not born, they're formed through training, experience, commitment, and self-sacrifice. And we can't find the courage to tell someone to put their seatbelt on, to ask someone that we're driving with to put away their cell phone, or we're riding with to put away their cell phone when they're driving. We can't find the courage to ask someone to put on a pair of safety glasses or to wear fall protection or to put their safety vest on. Do we think so little of their lives that we can't find that courage to do that? Do their lives mean so little to us, or do we just think that nothing's going to happen? Randy and Gary sure didn't believe that. They knew something was going to happen, and they took steps to do something about it. So who are the heroes in the safety world? I think you'd all agree that Captain Sullenberger was a safety hero. He was the one that guided the plane to safety after it hit that flock of geese and it landed in the Hudson River. And all 100 and some people on that flight survived because of him and his training. It was not a fluke that he knew what to do when that situation happened. We've talked about him in the past. You're all familiar with him. But a little less known hero is Roger Bosjolly. Most of you have never heard of him, but he too is a safety hero. He was a booster rocket engineer at the NASA contractor Morton Thiokol back in January of 1986. And he was disturbed by the data he was receiving about the booster rockets that would lift the Space Shuttle Challenger into space. 6 months before the Challenger explosion, Roger predicted a catastrophe of the highest order involving loss of life in a memo that he wrote to his managers at Thiokol. He knew that the seals around the boosters weren't meant to be launched in cold temperatures. He knew that they would stiffen and unseal. And NASA's ambitious launch schedule included winter liftoffs in risky temperatures, even for Florida. The morning before the launch, the forecast for the next morning, the morning of the launch at Kennedy Space Center, involved a launch time temperature of 30 degrees. And NASA had never launched in temperatures that cold before. And Roger and his 4 colleagues knew it was a disaster waiting to happen. They argued persistently and valiantly for 4 hours with their managers to get NASA on the phone so they could talk about this and perhaps delay the launch. Finally, their managers gave in and they set up a conference call. But the NASA officials challenged their recommendation. The NASA officials, one of them said, "I'm appalled by your recommendation." And another shuttle program manager didn't bother hiding his disdain. "My God, people, when do you want us to launch? Next April?" So that kind of coercion, the pressure from NASA, caused the Thiokol managers, Roger's managers, to put on their management hats. They overruled Roger and his other engineers, and they told NASA to go ahead with the launch. And then this happened. Roger didn't need a 2-year investigation to know exactly what happened. He knew immediately that those seals had failed. And unfortunately, 7 people lost their lives that day in a disaster that not only killed people, but set the space shuttle program back decades. An explosion that was not only preventable, but it was predictable. Roger left Thiokol. He went into a depression. He just kept thinking, what more could I have done? I didn't do enough. These people are gone, their families are suffering. I didn't do enough. But what more could he have done? He tried everything. So as I said, he left. He spent the rest of his life traveling to engineering schools all across the world, promoting ethical decision-making in engineering. And Roger died 8 months ago, and no one outside the safety community even noticed. But he left a legacy, and he died a hero in the minds of the young people he's trained, and he made a difference in our world. So what about you? What are you going to do when you're faced with safety decisions? Maybe not something as crucial as that, but little safety decisions all the time. What are you going to do? Where are you on that safety ladder today? Where were you 5 years ago? Are you improving? I want you to ponder something. If you knew the outcome of your unsafe act would be death or serious injury, would you still make that same choice? For most of us, no. So my husband, I haven't told you guys any stories about my husband. I tend to tell a lot of stories about him, but this fall, he was going to go do some spraying at my daughter's house for pests. And so he did what he always does. He took our old four-wheeler and he loaded it in the back of the truck, pickup, and he went to her place, sprayed the house down, and he comes back and he pulls in the yard, and I watch him. He's over there kind of looking at the truck and looking at the four-wheeler, and I'm like, what happened? Well, he's going down the road, and all of a sudden the four-wheeler went out of the back of the truck. And I'm like, what? Didn't you have it strapped in? Well, I never strap it in. I'm not going very far. I'm like, you mean to tell me, like, he said the brake was set. It shouldn't have left. I said, you mean to tell me you're driving down Highway 59 and you don't have the four-wheeler strapped in? Because I do that all the time. Not Highway 59, but I do it on gravel roads all the time. Thank God nobody was behind him. It bounced out, damaged the gears and whatnot, wound up going down in the ditch. But I'm like, there's the perfect example of nothing has ever happened before. It had never fallen out before. So therefore we start thinking, well, it's safe because nothing's going to happen. And thank God nobody was behind them. That wound up in their windshield or something. So, by the way, if you see my husband, pretend you don't know that story. But think about that. We have to think about these things beforehand. So now, I'm going to give you a break in a little bit, but on that sheet, you had a sheet that said 10 deadliest jobs. I want you guys, if you don't have one, let me know, I'll bring one around to you. I want you, without Googling, to come up with what you believe are the 10 deadliest jobs in the United States in 2018. And if you get them all right, I've got a prize for you. You don't even have to get them in the right order. But again, no Googling. So I'm going to give you a hint, because most people can't even come up with 10 occupations. I'm like, really? I'm going to give you a hint. The occupations with the highest rate of death tend to have one of these three things in common. Dangerous heights, where a fall would be fatal, frequent contact with dangerous machinery, or driving for substantial periods of time. Go. Deadliest. What in the United States kills more people? Which job? One more hint. If you write construction, I want you to be very specific as to what type of construction. Maybe. Give you a couple more minutes. Okay, so starting off with number 10 is grounds maintenance workers. Groundskeepers, maintenance workers. Why on earth would they be at number 10? A lot of them, lawnmower rollovers, they're working with dangerous equipment, they're working with chemicals, some electricity. Number 9 is supervisors of construction workers. I told you violence in the workplace. No, I don't know why it's supervisors, but if you just put construction workers, that's fine too. Number 8, every single one of you should have gotten right. We live in a farming community. We know the stories. How many of us know farmers who are missing fingers or a foot or, other serious injuries. Mainly farmers work around, dangerous equipment, livestock. Many of them have four-wheeler accidents, as well as grain bin engulfments. But what's interesting here is this is the one occupation in which there are more fatal injuries than non-fatal. If think about that. Of all the injuries you have, more of them are killed. If you remember just last... Well, they don't report. It comes through the medical, well, yeah, then there's no reporting, yeah. What's that? They have nobody to come and help them, right, exactly, yep. So if you remember just last November in Ada, there was a young mom and wife named Katie Vilmo who lost her life in injuries she suffered when she was feeding cattle, and the bale pinned her against the bale feeder, yep. So number 7, truck drivers and other drivers. So that was kind of a hint there. All the time they spend on the road, with motor vehicle crashes being the number 1. Number 6 is structural steel workers, because they're working at such high heights. They've come a long way from the old days where they didn't have fall protection. Kind of crazy when you watch some of those videos. Number 5 are garbage collectors, recyclable, refuse, solid waste. Just in Minnesota in June, we had a garbage collector get pinned between the truck and the dumpster, and he was killed. So it happens, number 5. Number 4 are roofers. Again, people working at heights. Number 3 are pilots and aircraft engineers. And I was shocked by this one. I'm like, really? Because I don't hear that many jetliners going down. But you have to remember, it's not just jetliners. It's your crop sprayers, your Learjet pilots, that. Number 2, deadliest catch, anyone? Commercial fishermen. So the reason commercial fishermen are so high up is, obviously they've got a pretty unsafe work environment, dangerous equipment, and they are so very far away when a severe injury happens. To get emergency medical help is a big problem. Number 1, anybody have a guess? What? Police? No, actually, they're kind of safe. What? Convenience store? No. Loggers. Loggers are our number 1. And again, the hazardous equipment, the dangerous, the long, far away from emergency medical help. Anybody get them all right? No, my $20 is safe again. Anybody have 9, 8, 7, 6? Anybody have 7? You had 7? Anybody have more than 7? No? All right. Well, you get the scratch off. There. They don't have to be in the right order. You can't? Oh, for Pete's sake. You can give it to whoever you want. Okay. I'll ask you guys, what are the hazards that you might face in your jobs? I want you to think, normally I'd have them write you down, but what are some things that could hurt you in your job? Huh? Bad people, violent people, law enforcement. You've got a lot of things out there that could hurt you. Cars. What else? Chemicals. Yep. Ice. Okay. You named some of them. But you know what? So often I have people who sit there and say, well, I don't really think there's anything that can hurt me. And I'm like, well, if we can't recognize them, we can't do anything to prevent it from happening. So if you work or drive in inclement weather, you work with equipment and tools, you walk on wet or slippery surfaces, You work on elevation, even ladders. You work with the public or visit homes. We've talked about that. If you work with chemicals, you mentioned electricity, traffic, work around blood or body fluids. If you sit all day, who knew that sitting all day was bad for your health? But do you know that? I mean, do you know that if you're not getting up and moving around and getting some exercise, you're sitting at your desk all day? That is just as bad for you as smoking. It is very cardiovascular. It increases your risk for diabetes. So anyway, get up and move when you can. If you lift heavy objects, you work around hazardous atmospheres, or if you work alone. You know, you work alone and something happens, who's going to come help you? So those are all different hazards that people face in their jobs. But now we're going to go over these 2018 fatality reports. So the way this form is set up, it's over here. It has the number of the incident, the date of the incident, the town that it happened in, the type of business, and the type, well, they're all fatalities. And then it'll give a brief description of the event, and then what Minnesota OSHA's investigation was, whether there was a citation issued, whether or not the case is still open. In fatalities, a lot of times the cases are still open because it takes a very long time for them to, there's lawsuits that get involved and everything. So the first one, and OSHA's fiscal year runs from October through the end of September, so that's why these dates are like that. The very first one happened in Bemidji, and that was a gentleman was installing sheetrock on a vaulted ceiling, and he fell over 6 feet from the plank of the scaffold onto the concrete floor below. What that brief little description doesn't tell you is his name was 69-year-old Kem Bailey, and he was a resident of Black Duck. He died 2 days later at the hospital. The next one happened in Tenney, Minnesota, and that was a laborer who fell more than 100 feet from a grain elevator. And he was a 21-year-old worker from Ukraine, and he was working with 2 other men on a platform, and they were adjusting another level of the platform when he fell. That company was issued 6 willful violations by OSHA, totaling over $366,000. Mainly for fall protection violations and lack of training. So here we've got an employee from a different country, and the company isn't providing training and fall protection. The next one was in Watkins, Minnesota. It was a maintenance employee. He was replacing an old key with a new key stock on a material handling unit when the frame of the unit rotated and it crushed the employee. That was 51-year-old Todd Schultz from Litchfield. He had a wife, 2 kids, ages 8 and 2 months. I was doing this at another county highway department, actually with here, and one of the guys at the highway department said, I didn't know that Todd died. I went to school with his brother. So we all know somebody. In Montevideo, that was an acquaintance. He wasn't even an employee, and he was pinned between a vehicle and a toolbox when the employee drove the vehicle up a ramp. What happened there is it was 55-year-old Richard Foltz, and he was just assisting his friend, who was the owner of a small automotive repair shop. And his friend was driving the vehicle up on the lift, and Richard had placed himself between the vehicle being driven on the lift and a toolbox against the concrete block wall. And the gentleman that was driving it onto the lift, his foot slipped off the brake and hit the accelerator, and it flew forward and it crushed his friend and killed him. Now there's one thing you should know when you're working around equipment: never ever put yourself in that position. You should never, you know, there's front end loaders, there's tractors, whatever. Try to never put yourself between a piece of mobile equipment and a hard surface that you can be crushed against. The next one happened in Delano. Actually, that's where my daughter lives. And a truck driver at a construction site, road construction, was struck by a truck that was being backed up. That was 55-year-old Jackie Brueggemeyer, and she was the sole female fatality we had last year in Minnesota. But she was a truck driver on the project, and she went to jump out of her truck without checking to see what another truck was doing, and the other truck was backing up and backed over her. She leaves behind 2 sons and a fiance. In Magnolia, a truck driver was descending stairs and fell, landing on the cement floor. This is not something that's real dangerous. He was walking down the stairs. In St. Paul, an employee at a chocolate manufacturing, or a non-chocolate confectionery manufacturing company, died from a blood infection. How important is it if you get a cut that you wash it, that you cover it, that you put some antibiotic ointment on it? We have started to see with the bacteria that are out there now a lot of very serious blood infections from that, that get into your cuts that are uncovered and unprotected. In Ellendale, a truck driver fell from the top of the engine compartment while cleaning the windshield. In Porter, Minnesota, a farm worker fell from a tractor. You start seeing the common thing here, fall, fall, fall. A home health care service aide in St. Paul was stabbed and died. That's our violence in the workplace. In St. Cloud, a detailer was cleaning out a truck cab standing on the truck step about 4 feet off the ground when he fell. In Leroy, Minnesota, a maintenance technician fell 11 feet while moving from a tractor bucket to an aerial lift basket. That was 43-year-old John Deere technician Gary Rederath, and he died at the scene, leaving a wife and 3 daughters. In Wadena, we had a laborer at a potato farming facility. A laborer was found unresponsive near a energized 480-volt electrical cord that had the plug-in partially disassembled, exposing the terminals. That was 23-year-old Michael Moso. He survived by his fiancée and a baby girl. How many times do you inspect your electrical cords? Do they have ground prongs on them? Do they have damaged insulation? Maybe a broken end? Because that's all it took for him. In Benson, a welder was inside an ash processing tower when a dried piece of ash fell from inside the walls or the ceiling of the tower. That was 54-year-old Jeff Anderson. He was just a temporary contract worker. It was a one-day job. And he is survived by his wife and 5 kids. Then in Hugo, Minnesota, we had a worker pinned between a semi-trailer and a front-end loader in the yard area. It was a logging company. And that was 36-year-old Aaron Reich from Buffalo. And he had simply stopped to help a coworker get his truck unstuck. And unfortunately, the truck rolled forward and it pinned Aaron against the loader. And he leaves a wife, 3 sons under 5, and an unborn baby due in 7 months. In Anoka, an employee was found lying on the floor at their workstation. They deemed that that was not work-related. That was a health event. In Chaska, Minnesota, at the middle school, a custodian fell from an 8-foot step ladder while he was hanging a thermostat wire and was killed. In Faribault, a worker installing a gutter was electrocuted when the elevated work platform contacted a power line. That was Eric Hunter. He was 42 years old. It's a very common thing when we're using aerial lifts that we don't look overhead and we lift it into a power line, or we're carrying a ladder and we don't look up and contact the power line. Keep in mind, with high voltage, you don't actually even need to contact the power line. You just need to get close enough for the power, the electricity to arc out to you. In Florida last spring, the baseball coach was replacing the scoreboard that had been damaged in a hurricane, They had done a huge fundraiser, and so they were out there with this aerial lift. It was the baseball coach, it was his wife, his son, a bunch of kids were out there, and he was using a lift that he wasn't familiar with, and he lifted it up into an overhead power line, and he was electrocuted. His wife went to help. She was electrocuted. Their 14-year-old son went running up. He was shocked, but he was not killed. But you can imagine the heartache that all those kids saw that day. Then in South St. Paul, a worker was found pinned under palletized steel. Number 20 in Fergus Falls, a worker was found lying on the floor in the fermentation room. That one was found not work-related. In Cloquet, a worker was found lying on the floor by the steam heater. It was a fall. In Richfield, a worker was struck in the head by a dislodged guard cover of a wood chipper. That was 62-year-old Bill Pipes from Fridley, and he was the father of 6 kids. He was hit by a flying piece of metal from the wood chipper. The other employee had removed the guard and started it, and the piece went flying out and hit Bill in the head. But had Bill had a hard hat on, you know, it might have resulted in a concussion or something, but most likely would not have killed him. In Shakopee, an employee was found lying on the floor in an automated area. In Lamberton, an employee slid into a silo chute and was engulfed by soybeans. That was 46-year-old Mark Arkell, and he had just moved closer to home and had recently taken a job at the farmer's co-op there. In Sartell, an employee fell while attempting to step up from an OSB board attached to a metal skid onto another OSB board, and he fell, was killed. The next one was a farming operation with only 2 employees, and the employee was asphyxiated while power washing inside a building. That was 33-year-old Tony Leilman. What do you think would asphyxiate someone? Just pressure washing inside a building? What would cause that? Carbon monoxide. Anytime you run an internal combustion engine, gas-powered engine, diesel-powered engine, inside a small enclosed area, you have to think that carbon monoxide is going to be given off, and it can build up very quickly. In Marshall, Minnesota, an employee fell, tripped while filling diesel fuel tanks, and died. In Orr, Minnesota, an employee was preparing to install grounds prior to repairing a power line. A storm had just gone through, and he wound up touching the power line that was energized, and that was 33-year-old Drew Schwartz, and he was a dad with 2 young kids. We had our first corrections officer in Minnesota killed in the line of duty in Bayport in July. That was 45-year-old Officer Joseph Gom. He was attacked by an inmate who was serving time for murder. He had just celebrated his 16th anniversary at the Department of Corrections, and he was working in the prison's industry building when he was attacked, and the building houses areas for carpentry and welding and that type of thing, and the man who killed him attacked him with a hammer. In Heron Lake, an employee fell into a manure pit while pressure washing. Elk River was another farming one. An employee was found lying on the ground in a field area. He had fallen. At 32 in Inver Grove Heights, it was a church, a custodial worker, groundskeeper. The lawnmower rolled over on top of an employee. Another Minnesota employee died in Cold Springs this past June in a lawnmower rollover. Same thing, rollover protective structure, pinned them, not wearing a seatbelt. In Minneapolis, an employee was electrocuted while changing out light bulbs. Do you guys turn the power off when you change light bulbs? If the bulb breaks, you have contact with the filament. It was a large wattage bulb that he was changing, and it killed him. In Brown County, the next 2, 34 and 35, happened within hours of each other. The first one was 19-year-old Caleb Fisher of Sleepy Eye. He was killed when he was caught in a manure spreader that he was trying to repair. 2 hours later, EMTs responded to another call in the county. 53-year-old John Hoffman was pinned between the combine and corn header, and he died at the scene. his friends joined together to bring in his last harvest. In Rogers, Minnesota, an employee was struck by a vehicle while collecting samples. There was a road construction project, and a Ford F-150 had stopped at the sign for the road construction project, like he was supposed to, and a semi-truck driver wasn't paying attention, and he didn't slow down, and he rear-ended the F-150, which caused it to fly into the work zone and hit and kill 59-year-old Vernon Hedquist of Pillager. Again, you don't need to be doing anything wrong. It's the people's actions around you that can also hurt and kill you. The next one is in Russell. A worker fell out of a scissors lift while conducting framing work. And the last one there was in Thief River Falls. They were building the new DigiKey building, and an employee with a subcontractor under McShane Company was pinned between an I-beam and the aerial lift while installing bolts. I didn't get any more details on that one. And then, of course, we have Gene Wynn Jr. That's not on your list here, but he was the DNR guy by Pine City. They got a call that there was a potential drowning or a body in the lake, and they got out there, and him and I believe it was a deputy sheriff, launched a boat, and the boat wound up capsizing, and they were both thrown into the water, and the deputy made it off to shore, but the DNR officer did not, and he drowned. And what was he not wearing? A life vest. What do DNR officers write you up for? You know, what are we thinking of? We just don't think anything's going to happen. We have to be prepared for the unexpected. In addition to these fatalities are the ones that occur off the job. A longtime Minnesota youth hockey coach died after suffering a significant brain injury when he hit his head on the ice. He had coached kids for many years in the St. Michael, Albertville area, and on November 26th, he fell and hit his head on the ice, suffering a traumatic brain injury that led to a couple weeks in the ICU and his eventual death. His son described the injury, stating that the chin strap on his dad's helmet wasn't fastened, and when he hit the ice, it flew off while he was teaching a hockey drill. He said it just goes to show you how important it is to have your helmet secured, because had it been, he maybe would have had a concussion, but he wouldn't be dead. And then in Stearns County in August, we had a man died in what they called a freak accident. And that was a 54-year-old Joseph Pauley, and he was doing repair work on a semi, and he was using a hydraulic bottle jack to lift one of the axles while he changed the tire. Well, the jack slid out from underneath the axle, and the truck came down on him. And family members discovered him and called 911. That is not a freak accident. That happens all the time when we just leave something up on a jack instead of putting blocks underneath it. It's a very common thing. And then finally, on August 24th, a 26-year-old off-duty DNR officer was killed when the tractor he was driving rolled on a hill next to his home near Frazee, and it pinned him underneath. And he had worked as a deputy sheriff in Marshall County prior to joining the DNR. And I have to wonder, had he sat through one of these trainings like you guys? Did I know him? Had I seen him? You know, all of these things come with a cost. And I want to ask you guys, what do all these people have in common? Other than they made a list. What do you think they have in common? Well, there is no profile for a person who dies as a result of an on-the-job accident. They come from all walks of life. They're all ages. They're male, they're female. Some are very experienced, some are not experienced. Admittedly, most are male. Some weren't trained well. Maybe some took a shortcut, maybe some were distracted, and several were killed by nothing that they did wrong, but the actions of another person. But they do have something in common. They're all co-workers, community members, family members, They're all people who had a lot to offer the world, and they all left people behind who were devastated by their deaths. And another thing they had in common is not one of them, when they went to work that day, thought that they wouldn't be going home in the same way that they came to work in. Not one of them thought they were going to become a fatality statistic, because it was just a common, ordinary day. So when we do things that put ourselves at risk or that put other people at risk, bad things can and do happen. So who inspires you or inspired you to work safely? Who's that person that has done that in your life? Me. Mom? Your mom? Aren't they always the ones after you? Yeah. I want you to think about who that person is. What name pops into your head when you think, who do I look to keep me safe? Or who's the safest person that I know? Who's that person? Sometimes it's a parent, a coworker, maybe a teacher, a motivational speaker, maybe a boss or a friend. And now is the challenge for you guys is who will look to you as the person to keep them safe or to teach them, inspire them to work safely. We all have a lot of people looking out for us. So this past September, maybe August, our snowmobile club had a gathering, kind of an appreciation night at our local sportsman's club, clubhouse. And we're out there and having a meal and stuff, and they decided to have a bonfire. So we had all the wood stacked there, and we were all gathered around, and someone needed to start the fire. So what do we do when we start a bonfire? My 20-year-old nephew says, I can do that. The flame wasn't going very much. There was a little flame going. He goes, we'll just put a little gas on that, and that'll get it going. And I'm like, you are not going to use gas. I went back in the building, and all of a sudden I see this woof. I'm like, well, Corey, use gas. And nothing happened. I mean, the flame got bigger, but he wasn't burned by it. You got to be you should never use gasoline, obviously, because it's the vapor that burns and it can flash back to you. Very dangerous thing to do. But nothing happened other than the desired result. But you know what? My 4-year-old grandson watched him do that. So what do you think that taught 4-year-old Dawson? That you can throw gasoline on a fire and it can poof up and nobody gets hurt, right? Be careful what you inspire others to do, because you all have people watching you, and you don't want to inspire them to do something that's unsafe. This is why women live longer than men. So I mentioned there was only one female fatality last year in Minnesota. And then I saw this, someone shared it on Facebook. So we got this little girl, and she's coming down off the slide, and look at her, ever so careful, comes down, and here's the guy. He is just hell-bent for election, and poof, And I thought, this is just so true. But as males, men typically are more of a risk taker than women, and there is a reason for that. That's how you were made. Back in the old caveman days, we had to have guys who were willing to take those kind of risks. In today's world, we need to temper that with common sense. So now I'm going to go through just navigating Polk County's web page safety site. The county has done a lot of work in putting their safety program and all their forms on their intranet. And I will tell you that you are probably one of the few counties, at least in this part of the state, that have got to this point. So that's a really awesome thing that you guys have done. But just to show you how it works, you go to your internet, you click on the safety program button there, and that will bring you to the county safety page. You can see it says safety on the upper left there. And here you have access to all the different forms. If you have an injury, there's a first report of injury button you can click on, fill out the form. If you have a near miss you want to report, you can click on the button, it pulls up a form. If you want to access the safety manual, the right to know program, emergency action, all these different things, you can do it all from your intranet page. So here's your, as I said, first report of injury link. You pull it up and you can fill that out. Same thing with the near miss report, with the safety manual, employee right to know program. Your emergency action plan, the purpose is to protect employees, and public within the building too, but from injury, property loss, or loss of life in the event of an emergency situation. And so it addresses all of those types of emergencies. If you go to your Aware Program button, it gives you the statement from the County Board of Commissioners about their commitment to providing a safe workplace for Polk County employees. If you go to the Aware, which is the safety program, you can click on any one of those things and it brings up what the goals and objectives are for 2018. And then on the forms part, you can click on, if you're a supervisor and you have an employee that has violated safety rules consistently, you might want to click on the disciplinary notice, and there it's right there available to you. If you hire a new employee, you need to do an employee orientation. You click on the form and you pull it up, fill it out, make sure it gets to HR. So here we've got that safety hazard or near miss report form. If you see a safety hazard or if you see a near miss, we need you to report it so it can be addressed. If it's not addressed, if it's not fixed, it's going to remain there until someone gets hurt on it. So a near miss is like a close call. It's a chain of events that very nearly results in property damage, serious injury, or death, and it has the potential to result in injury or physical damage, but did not. Near misses are golden opportunities to prevent an injury from happening, but we have to identify them. You see somebody slip on an icy sidewalk, report it. Make sure it gets salted so we can try and address that. Under documents and forms, you can click on any one of these and your forms will come up. If you did a fire evacuation or you want to see the tornado shelter sites, you can click on it there. Some departments have very specific programs. So highway department or say the incinerator, the solid waste will have some heavy equipment. They may work with compressed gas. They may work with welding. And so there you would just click on those to read those different programs. Every month they add a new safety topic. So you can see the different things from active shooter to skin cancer to, where to place your smoke alarms, and a lot of good information out there. Your safety committee, that's not all the members, but a lot of them are there. And if you have an opportunity to join the safety committee, that's a great thing to do. Here we've got a list of our members and their contact information. If you want to send an email, you can do it individually, or you can do it to the safety board or the safety committee as a whole. If you want to view the agenda and minutes, you just click on those different tabs and then you pull up the different documents there. And of course, if you want to know when the next safety committee meeting is going to be held, you click on the safety calendar. And if you want to view a safety training video, you can click on that as well. Your safety committee board, more information is under the HR tab on your website. It's listed right there. Here you can again pull up your topics, all your plans, your forms. And then if you want to look at your safety data sheets for chemicals, again you go to HR, you look under safety data sheets, and you can pull it up by department, which is a good thing to be able to do that. So I'm going to grab my water. Let's talk about some general safety rules. We're going to go through these kind of quickly. I already talked about promptly reporting any unsafe conditions, unsafe actions that you see someone doing, your injuries that you have. Please report those within 24 hours. Say that you had a minor cut. Are you going to report that? It's not a big thing. You don't need to go to the doctor. You don't need stitches. Are you going to report that? Depends on the cost. Like what? Like, oh. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. What if it's a cut, and I'm going to caution you to go ahead and report it for one reason. Obviously, if, like you said, if there's something sharp that you cut it on, we need to address that. But the other thing is, if you don't need to go to the doctor because it's not a big thing, you don't need stitches, but a week from now, gosh, starting to look a little infected. And so you go into the doctor, it's not healing well. You go into the doctor, and what's the doctor going to ask you? Where did this happen? And what are you going to say? You're going to say at work, because that's where it happened, right? When you say at work, what is that going to trigger? A work-related claim, right? So it'll go back to work comp, so you don't get billed for it on your personal insurance. Okay, but then that form is going to go through to work comp, and work comp is going to say, well, there was no first report of injury. We don't know anything about this. It didn't happen at work. They're going to deny it. Okay? So now work comp has denied it. You're now on expensive antibiotics because it's an infection that's maybe antibiotic resistant, or it's a serious infection. And so the antibiotics are expensive. So then you send it to your personal insurance. And your personal insurance is going to look at the medical report, and it's going to say, what happened at work? And you are caught in the loop of no payment. So it is for your own protection to always document those, report those. And, it doesn't cost the county anything to have a first report of injury that, it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it goes to work comp, but if there's no claim attached to it, it's fine. Don't feel bad about that. We want you to report those things. So let's talk about near misses. This is a building, a transportation garage at one of my schools, and I was walking out from one building, one shop, into the transportation building, and there's a little sidewalk that walks along here, and I'm walking along, and the guy I'm walking with says, Barb, you might want to look up. And I looked up, and it's in the spring of the year, and we've got metal roofs, and the sun is heating the snow, and that ice is dripping down, and I'm like, oh, wow. And he goes, yeah. He goes, now look over there. He said, you see those big sheets of ice? I'm like, yeah. He goes, those fell off the roof 2 days before. You look at the thickness of that ice. If that fell on someone, that could kill someone. And I'm like, so what are we doing about this so that we don't walk on this today? And he goes, well, obviously nothing. I'm like, obviously. But this happens every year. And everybody is like, well, what can we do? It happens every year. Well, you know what? Block off that walkway and bore a doorway through the two buildings, because there's a solid wall like that, so that you don't have to go outside. You could do that, or you could go out the front of the building. Well, nobody likes to go out to the front of the building because it takes a little longer. Until you can fix this problem, we can't just allow people to walk through. But that's a near miss. When those chunks fell off, they didn't hit anybody, they didn't kill anybody, but had the situation been a little different, it certainly could have. Okay, so those are things we want you to report. Know and follow your safety rules at all times. Encourage others to do the same. If you're unsure about something, how to do a job, ask. Observe and obey your warning signs on equipment and buildings. They're there for protection. Obey your no smoking policies. Don't misuse or destroy equipment. And if it's damaged, report it. Talking about electrical safety, you should always use power strips rather than extension cords. Extension cords are allowed to be used as temporary use only, 90 days or less. So if you've got an extension cord plugging in a computer, change it out to a power strip. Power strips are not considered temporary. If you have any of those two-prong extension cords, those cheap 99-cent ones you buy at Walmart, get rid of them in the workplace. They're lightweight. They're not allowed in the workplace at all. At your home, they're allowed, but they're very lightweight and they cause fires if you overload them. Don't daisy chain cords. So if you've got power strips or an extension cord, it needs to be plugged directly into an outlet. You can't, plug them into other power strips and other extension cords. You can't hide cords, so you can't run cords through ceiling tiles, through doorways, windows, that type of thing. Make sure that your cords and plugs are in good condition. If you notice any damage like that, you want to get it reported. You actually cannot, in the workplace, repair electrical cords by wrapping an electrical tape around it. You actually need to use a proper shrink wrap repair kit. Don't use these multiple plug adapters like is shown here. These do not have any overcurrent protection. So you are taking an outlet designed for 2 outlets and you're now plugging 4 or 6 things into it. And so it's better to use a power strip here that has overcurrent protection right on it. When you unplug cords, grasp the plug, not the cord. When you grasp the cord, that's where we start seeing what we call damage strain relief, where you can see the wires there. And remember, water and electricity don't mix. So if you do have water and you need to run a cord, it should be plugged into a GFI outlet. Or you can also buy portable GFI. So if you don't have a GFI outlet or a GFI on your outside outlet, for example, you can buy just a portable one that plugs in and then you can plug your cord into that. And a GFI operates so that if it detects any loss of current, like it's going through you, it will trip that out in 0.4 of a second. So you will barely even get a shock and it'll trip it out. So it'll save you from being electrocuted. Good housekeeping is the number one thing you can do to prevent slips, trips, and falls. So you want to make sure that you're cleaning your work areas. Don't leave things on the floor. Here we've got a guy that left air hose strung across the walkway. The guy that's walking in is probably doing something unsafe and that he's carrying 2 boxes that he can't see over. Well, he's going to walk in and he's either going to hit those white things there or he's going to trip on that air hose. So if you got a work area like this that needs to be cleaned up, be careful about storing things on floors just because they become trip hazards. Use step stools or ladders to reach objects, not climbing on chairs and tables and whatnot. You want to make sure you use the right type for the job. So here we are putting up the flood wall between Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. And what do you notice wrong? The ladder. That's a step ladder. It needs to be set up like a step ladder. They're using it like an extension ladder, and that's not how they're meant to be used. How about here? Not a tall enough ladder. We're standing on the edge, so that's not a very secure thing to do. Don't obstruct your emergency devices. Fire extinguishers, electrical panels, exit doors have to be kept clear. This school went all out and they put hazard tape around the electrical panels. They put orange signs on them that says, do not store anything within 3 feet. And yeah, it's a discipline thing. We gotta address that. If you have space heaters, they must have the tip over protection. The easiest way to tell is to plug it in, turn it on, tip it forward. If it shuts off automatically, it's got it. If it keeps running, it doesn't. And you can't have a space heater in the workplace that does not have tip over protection. You shouldn't have them in your home either because they just keep running. I will warn you, space heaters are a common cause of fires in homes, and would you please make sure you keep a 3-foot clearance between your space heaters and your combustible material, and you should always unplug them in the workplace at night. Don't just turn them off, they should be unplugged. Lift safely, use mechanical aids when possible. something's too heavy, ask for help. Follow safe chemical handling procedures. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Be familiar with the hazards of chemicals before you use them, and know the location of your safety data sheets, which you can get via the intranet now. And please don't bring chemicals from home. I have a few schools, teachers will like to bring in their products because they like them better. Your school doesn't have a safety data sheet on it. It may be a corrosive, which requires an eye wash station in your classroom, and that's just not feasible. So you shouldn't be bringing them from home. And then don't use chemical products unless you're authorized and trained. So here we've got a de-icer for car windows that I found in one of the county highway shops. And I mean, how hazardous is that, right? How hazardous is that? Well, anytime you see 5 pictograms on a chemical container, that's going to be a pretty hazardous substance. So I looked at this and I'm like, okay, the skull and crossbones means it's poisonous. The next one means it's corrosive. The next one means it's flammable. The silhouette means that it has very serious health effects. And I'm like, what is going on with this? So I got the safety data sheet and I pulled it out. And I looked under personal protective equipment, and it says you have to use rubber gloves when you're working with this product, because if it is absorbed through the skin, it damages your optic nerve, which leads to blindness. So I went to the supervisor and I'm like, so, you guys wear gloves when you're working with this? And they're like, no. I'm like, did you read this? And he's like, no. And I'm like, where did you get this stuff? And he goes, well, a vendor came through and he had a good deal on it and he was just giving us samples. And I'm like, no. Number one, a vendor comes in, gives you a sample. You now have to keep that safety data sheet for 30 years. Number two, you have to make sure that you know what employees are exposed, what the hazards are. You need to read this information before you just put it out there for employees to use. And then you got to train them on it. Don't report to work under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Follow the rules of the road, especially, that distracted driving, your seatbelt. Don't operate equipment you're not authorized or trained for. So you might need to move something with the forklift, but if you're not trained and licensed as a forklift operator, you don't get to do that. You have to ask someone else. If you're working with any of these things, you need to make sure that you're inspecting them before use and reporting damage to your supervisor. Shouldn't wear jewelry or torn loose clothing around equipment and machines. Don't work on equipment that's missing guards. Some of you are required to wear personal protective equipment. It really just depends upon the job and the task that you're doing. Law enforcement, highway department, solid waste, they're going to be wearing more personal protective equipment than the average office worker. So it just depends upon what you're working with. Again, there's many different types, but it is up to you to wear it. Your employer provides it, you are required to wear it. Here we've got a guy out there, no high visibility vest. Law enforcement, they're coming out with gloves now that are puncture resistant. So when you're doing a search where you might have exposure to needles, they are coming out with some better gloves, just so you know that. Please make sure you're using the right type for the job. Plastic bag over your face is not considered a face shield. Wearing safety goggles up on your head doesn't give you any protection. Make sure that it's in good condition. Those leather welding pants, I mean, come on. They've seen better days. And then make sure you're storing it properly. Here we've got a respirator to store it in the flammable cabinet, and that's not a proper storage. So what's wrong with this? Putting up that flood wall again. Standing on the top of that pillar. No fall protection. What about the guy on the lower right? He doesn't have any high visibility clothing. Those guys are working with a chunk of metal that could cause a head injury. No hard hat, and then that gets put in the paper. So for those of you that are required to heavy equipment operators or solid waste where you're going to be doing some lockout tagout procedures, You just need to remember that if you're going to be doing any repairs, maintenance, clearing a jam, removing or bypassing a guard, or anytime you're reaching your part of your body into what we call a point of operation zone, you need to make sure that it's locked out. So here we've got what I talked about before, where someone reaches in between the hoist and the frame, or the box and the frame on the truck. There needs to be a lockout device so that can't come down if you need to do that. Here we're in a wood chipper. You know, I hope somebody doesn't leave the keys in the machine. Or here we've got somebody going into a paper compactor baler. And if you look at this here, I mean, who puts themselves in there without making sure it's locked out? And if you look at there's those little blue lights up there, that means there's power going to this machine. You know, lockout, tagout injuries are the most gruesome, deadly injuries we have. They result in crushing and amputations and a horrible type of injuries, loss of limbs. So you need to make sure you're following proper procedures. So you have to identify all types of energy that go to a piece of equipment. You might be working on a front end loader, for example, where you've got the electrical system, which can be locked out. You have hydraulic, you have pneumatic, you might have gravity, you know, that could come down. So you need to identify them, and remember, turning off a machine does not lock it out. You have to identify all sources of energy that are in there. So once you lock out a piece of equipment, and you're an authorized employee where you're capable of doing this, you have to have a specific lock. You're the only person who has the key for that lock. You can't duplicate the key, and those locks and tags can't be used for any other purpose than to lock out the energy or the switch or the circuit breaker, so that nobody can turn it on while you're working on it. So there's different types of lockout devices. In the upper left-hand corner are the little devices they put so that the box can't come down on the truck. On the lower, on the skid steer, there's a lift arm support there so that if you need to work on it when the arms are up in the air, it can't come down and crush you and kill you. Plug lockout devices, circuit lockout devices, valves. There's all different kinds of equipment out there available. This is not a good lockout. A sign that says, don't touch the light switch, don't touch the light switch. They don't even use punctuation. Working on electrical. Well, that doesn't provide anybody with any protection. However, a switch lockout device like this that you put over the switch, you put a padlock on it, nobody can physically turn that switch on while you're working on it. A general lockout procedure includes you just notify people in the area that I'm going to be working on this piece of equipment. You gather your tools, your equipment that you need. You shut down the equipment, the normal shutdown procedure. You isolate it. Is there other power flowing through it that I need to shut off a circuit breaker? You need to identify your mechanical, your hydraulic, pneumatic, all sources. Supply your lockout device. If there's any mechanical or compressed air storage, you want to dissipate that or release it. Then you literally try and start that machine, and it shouldn't start. If it does, you missed a step and you need to review the procedure. You do your work, and now you're going to restore it. Your work is done. You clear your tools. You make sure nobody's in harm's way. Make sure the controls are off or neutral. You remove your lockout devices, and you let everybody know it's back in operation. So a very simple procedure. You do need to have specific written procedures for all equipment that has more than one energy source. And if you have more than one person working on it, they each need to put their lock on the hasp. And then as they're done, they remove their lock. And the last person who's working on it removes the hasp as well. So what happens if somebody leaves a lock on a piece of equipment and they've left for the day, and you're pretty sure the equipment is back in operation, that they finished their work on it? Can you just go and take a bolt cutter and remove their padlock? You cannot do that. Only a supervisor can remove it, and it's only after they've attempted to contact the employee whose lock it is, and they have to make sure that the equipment's in good working condition, the guards are replaced, there's no tools in the area, and they have to notify the person whose lock it was before they come back on shift, and it all has to be documented. If you're going to work on a piece of equipment that is just cord and plug connected, you don't need to lock it out provided that cord is in your possession. But if you can't finish it in that one day and you're going to leave for lunch or you're going to leave for the end of the day, then you do have to put a lockout device on it. So for the rest of you, all you need to know is if you see those devices, those little lockout things with a lock on it and a tag, don't touch it. Somebody's working on it. And finally, for all of you, under the safety program, your employer has to have disciplinary procedures. So if you as an employee refuse to follow a safety rule, if you engage in unsafe work habits, or if you create a condition, an unsafe condition that endangers someone else, then disciplinary action would happen according to your union policy or whatever your department procedure is for that. But your employer does have that right and responsibility to do that. I was listening one day to a radio program and they were talking to a well-known doctor, and this one person calls in and says, "What would you say is the key to a long, healthy life?" And he said, "I have 2 words. Don't fall." Falls cause more disabling injuries, debilitating injuries that limit your movement later on in life. And so what can we do to not fall? Well, when you look at all the different slip and trip hazards we have out there, we got cords, we got ice, we got unsafe, elevated things we stand on, trip hazards again. Number 1, identify them. What in your work area is capable of causing slips, trips, and then falls? You have to practice situational awareness. That is huge. You should not be walking where your eyes haven't gone before. So by simply paying attention and not being distracted, we can prevent a lot of our slips, trips, and falls. The next thing is, what type of footwear are you wearing? When it's icy out, we shouldn't be wearing hard-soled shoes that slip very easily. We shouldn't be wearing high-heeled shoes. We should be wearing things that have grip. We should be wearing those traction devices if we're walking on ice. Keep an eye out for trip hazards, slippery surfaces, uneven surfaces, and then lighting is a big indicator as well. So here's a school. They've got a mat like that. Would you recognize that as a hazard that needs to be reported? It should be reported, because I will guarantee you that anything that sticks up and curls up like the curled edge on a rug is going to catch someone's foot. Because as you're walking along, you are only picking your feet up 3/8 of an inch. And anything over that, you're going to catch and trip on. And older people, they pick their feet up even less. So they will trip on those things. If your work area looks like this, you stand up and you step on a piece of paper and you lose your traction and you slip. When you get off equipment, 3 points of contact always, 2 hands and a foot as you climb down. You should never be jumping out of equipment like that. And even in our office areas, how many of us have done that? We've left a file drawer open, we get up and we turn and we trip over it. Never store things on stairs. Make sure you're using your handrails. Skylights. For those of you that need to go up on roofs, if you have skylights, be very careful. Those skylights weaken over time and exposed to the sun, and especially cleaning snow off in the wintertime, you could step on that and you go right through. So those are now required to be guarded by OSHA, so there needs to be a guardrail or a guard system over that. And then on bottom, that picture, can you see the stairs? It's very hard to see the stairs, isn't it? Because the carpet doesn't have a delineation between the steps there. And so if you're walking along there, you can see a lot of people fall there. It's just a poor design. So Even though it's relatively new carpet, somebody didn't do a good job of it. So you need to install some facing on the steps there. So just some things to prevent slip, trips, and falls. Slow down, walk slowly. Try not to carry things. You can use your arms for balance. Where do you park? Are you parking in an area where there's a lot of ice, or can you park in an area where it's more cleared off? I know that becomes a real issue. Use handrails and clean your shoes off on the mats provided. Okay, where are we at? Yes, we need to do our weakest link game here. So, how this is going to work, every team, you guys will be one team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just hang on to these. I'll tell you what to do with them in a minute. Everybody gets 5 sheets of paper. Every team, I'll let you hang on to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Now, I'm going to ask a series of questions, and I'm going to start with team 1. And if you get the answer right, you keep your sheet of paper. But if you get the answer wrong, you lose your sheet of paper. And the first team that loses all their sheets of paper is what we would call the weakest link. Okay? So, winner. All right. So guys, question and gals, question number 1. How many pictograms are there in the global harmonization system of classifying chemicals? So those little pictograms, how many are there? 9! Oh man, you guys are awesome! It usually takes somebody 3-4 minutes to figure that out. Okay, what's the first thing you do, team 2, in a medical emergency? Call 911. Man, you guys are on it. Usually it takes a few minutes. What is the acronym to remember the steps to using a fire? Who said pass? Wow, very good. Do you know what it stands for? Pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep. Yep, but you get to keep it because all I was looking for was pass. All right, so what should you guys do in the event of a chemical poisoning? Bingo. Yeah, call poison control. If you don't have that number, put it into your cell phone because you'll never remember it in an emergency. They are the best resource for you to call for small advice, big advice. They will tell you exactly what you need to do. Okay? Team 2, how long can you use an extension cord for it to be considered temporary? When do you have to report an injury? Immediately or within 24 hours. Yep. A chemical that has a low flash point, burns easily, and has that pictogram is called what? Flammable. Okay. What is a signal word? There are 2 signal words used with chemicals. One means it's a very hazardous, very dangerous chemical, and the other means it's less hazardous. Which signal word means that it's very hazardous? Danger is right, yes. Good. All right, what's the other word? What's the one for less hazardous? Caution, it's warning. It used to be danger, warning, caution. They did away with caution, and now it's just danger and warning. So what are the hazards of that product? What can you tell me about that product? Looking at the label? It's flammable. Okay, yeah, health risk. Yeah. What's that exclamation? Oh, you're close. No, it's flammable. So flammable and combustible. Combustible is not as, they're kind of the same, only flammable has a low flash point. Combustible means that it needs to be heated. So It means it has, that exclamation point means it's an irritant. It'll cause some irritation to your skin. It's not as bad as corrosive, which causes eye and skin burns and damage. And then the last one there means it's an environmental hazard. A chemical that can explode is called explosive. Explosive. A chemical that causes severe skin and eye burns is called what? Caustic or corrosive. Yep. Okay, so guys, what does the pictogram for corrosive look like? The hand with the, yep, okay, with the beaker over it. Good. What is an example of a chronic health effect? So some chemicals cause acute health effects which show up right away, and some cause chronic health effects. So it comes from a series of chemical exposures over a long period of time, and now you have a chronic health effect. What do we, give me an example of what a chronic health effect would be. Yeah, mesothelioma or cancer, Parkinson's disease, reproductive problems, infertility or sterility, kidney and liver disease. Give me an example of an acute health effect, one that comes from a one-time exposure to a chemical and it's showing up right away. A burn, okay, yep. Dizziness, headache, nausea, shortness of breath, yep. What are the three ways chemicals enter your body? Ingestion, inhalation, and absorption. Yep, good. If a chemical gets in your eye or on your skin, what should you do with it? Rinse it out for how long? That's not part of the question, but it's 15 minutes. Okay, rinse with water, 15 minutes. Acetylene, oxygen, propane, helium, argon, aerosol cans are all examples of what? Gases, compressed gases, yep. What type of hazard is that pictogram? Environmental, very good, yep. What type of hazard is this pictogram? Poison or toxic. And what type of chemical container does not need a label? Water.
They all need a label.
I'll just take it now. No. Right. It is the immediate use container. So if you're going to put bleach in the laundry and you use it like right away, it doesn't have to have a label. That's the only one. What is the safety data sheet?
Oh, sheet data.
Oh man. What kind of safety data? On that particular, so what would it tell me, like?
If it's corrosive.
Okay, what the hazards are, okay, what personal protective equipment, okay. What is the most common cause of vehicle crashes? Distracted driving is correct. The bite from this kind of tick can cause Lyme disease. Deer tick, and it should be an infected deer tick. But the most common cause of death in motor vehicle crashes? What natural disaster causes the most deaths? Tornado and floods. I heard both. What do you have to go with? Floods is right. Yes. This means a tornado has been spotted in the area and you must take shelter. A warning is correct. So on your sheets that I handed out, it gives you your procedures on what to do in a tornado, where your shelter areas are, the calling tree, all of that. So make sure you review those. How often do you guys need to inspect fire extinguishers? Once a month? Wow. Everybody usually says annual, but it's an annual service and a monthly inspection. Do new homes burn faster or slower than those built 30 years ago? How many want to say, how many say faster? How many say slower? Slower habits, you would be wrong. It would be faster. So, why on earth is that? Why do our new homes burn faster? It's because of the open floor plans and our synthetic materials. A home built 30 to 50 years ago, fire studies will show you that you had 17 minutes from the time it started before it would be fully engulfed. In today's homes, you're talking 3 minutes. 3 minutes to get out of that.
They gather their information.
It's the fire. It's the fire.
Bandit was
This
best.
doesn't
Asbestos bandit.
The ceiling.
This is great for that.
Yes, it was.
So you guys who have kids, would you please go through that fire evacuation plan with them? Because where do we find kids in fires? Where do we find them? Under the beds or in the closets. Yep, you need to make sure that they know they need to get out and get out now. Okay? How far do you have to keep space heaters from combustion? 3 feet. I gave that one away. Here we have the safety committee members. I kind of screwed that up, and I was going to have you name one. But what percentage of people ejected from a vehicle in a crash or rollover die? I'll give it to you.
You know this.
Take your guess. It's 80. So.
Oh, way to go.
It's like-
Savior. We need one back. We need one back. For
How often does emergency lighting have to be tested?
Monthly.
Monthly, but yeah, I'm sure they'll thank you for that. What's the most common cause of house fires? Cooking is good, yeah. Are you required to use a fire extinguisher at work? No. What do you do if your clothes catch fire? Roll. What's the one thing you should never use when traveling on ice? Control, okay. What state has the highest number of workplace fatalities?
Oh, for Christ's sake. California.
California? It's Alaska.
Really?
Yeah?
Shit.
North
We
Dakota.
need one back. They've been
North Dakota's number 2. The oil industry. In Minnesota, what percentage of workplace fatalities were men? 10%? 97, yeah. What's the number one thing you can do to prevent workplace injuries? It's practice good housekeeping. I knew you weren't going to get it.
I've been in your office.
I knew it. What's the most common cause of office fires?
Space heater.
Electrical. Yeah, which space
You gotta
heater is
get it.
part of that. What's a colorless, odorless gas from internal combustion engines? Carbon monoxide. For the first time in history, this cause of death has surpassed motor vehicle death.
Texting.
Overdoses, yes. Opioids, yep. True or false? Every state has at least some kind of seatbelt law for adults.
Probably Alabama.
This is another
True or
I
false?
think it's
False is right.
way to go.
In New Hampshire, libertarian state, in Illinois, more deaths due to crash. Most motor vehicle crashes occur within this distance from home.
10 miles.
It's 25 miles, but.
Uh-oh.
Get their sheet, come on.
Oh.
True or false? If a lightning strike is imminent, you hear hissing, cracking, the hair on your neck stands up, or back of your head stands up. Should you lie flat on the ground? True or false?
That'd be the magnetic field or something. Yeah, magnetic field you're feeling.
True?
That'd be the same as
What do you guys
a
think?
lightning storm where the energy comes.
What do you think? Yeah. Should you lay right on the ground, or what should you do?
Yes.
I'll take false.
True.
If it's false, you want to make yourself as small as target as possible. So you want to crouch down. What
What's the deadliest day of the year for motor vehicle crashes? 4th of July. Did someone give you that answer? No, he was right. Wow.
What do they all Google?
4th of July, drinking, bad behavior, drinking,
A lot of traveling.
high rates of speed, usually good weather. Yeah. So what should you do if someone has called in a bomb threat?
Evacuate to the designated.
Report, evacuate. Yep, okay. Well, first of all, you want to get as much information from the caller as possible. So you want to go to your intranet site, and there's a bomb threat call sheet that you can pull up when you It's there. It's available for you guys. Any evacuation, what should you do? Shut your door. Whoops. Yeah, I knew you guys were going to shop. We're getting in a hurry. What do you do if you accidentally activate the panic alarm?
Contact law enforcement and let them know it's on.
Right, yep, contact law enforcement, let them know that it's accidental. I already showed you what does a suspicious package look like. It looks like that. Okay, too much postage. What should you do if you see a suspicious object? Pressure cooker, pipe bomb. Report it. Report it, okay. Don't touch it, number one. Okay. Please don't allow things stored in exit corridors because you see things like that and someone could have an incendiary device in there and nobody would think anything of it if you allow items to be stored there. So what should you do if there's an armed intruder in the building? Freak out. No, that's not what you want to do. Okay. Call 911. Okay. All right.
Stand button.
First thing you can do, if you can,
Stay
is
calm, number one.
stay calm. First thing you want to do is evacuate if you can do it safely. Okay, so that's a little bit of a change. I know a lot of people in schools and stuff, they're still looking at changing it. A lot of them are no longer just locking down. They are, if you can get out, get out. You know, if you can't get out.
Who's number one here thinks we should shoot?
Well, yeah, you guys. Yeah. You're armed, you're ready to go.
We want
But-
to get rid of the threat.
Yes, yes. The rest of us evacuate, call 911. If we can't evacuate, now we want to hide. You want to close, lock doors, turn off sources of noise, stay quiet. If you can't evacuate, we already talked about that. Law enforcement's arrived. What should you do? Follow their directions, hands in the air. This is not the time that you grab onto them screaming uncontrollably. They are there to take down the armed intruder. Let them do their job, okay? They are not also there to provide first aid. I mean, if that armed intruder is still in the building, they have got to go find that person. So they may be stepping over wounded people, but people will come in, you know, after that event. Okay? Okay. You guys, I'm just going to go through this quick. We have 3 bloodborne viruses: hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. Hepatitis B and C cause liver disease, and then HIV leads to AIDS. There's 3 ways you can get a bloodborne exposure to a bloodborne, or a workplace exposure to a bloodborne virus. Non-intact skin, someone else's blood, body fluids on your non-intact skin, through your eyes, nose, or mouth, or through a needle stick. In any one of those situations, you've got to report it. You've got to go to the medical facility and tell them you had an exposure incident and fill out an exposure incident report form. But before you do any of that, you want to wash. You want to wash that blood out. You want to wash that needle stick out. Rinse your eyes if it was in your eyes. They're nothing to mess around with. We're starting to see, obviously, a few more needles and that type of thing. Law enforcement will notice that. We're finding needles on playgrounds right now. People who are injecting heroin, they're throwing out on playgrounds. So if you have kids, would you please make sure that they are actually wearing tennis shoes? They should never be barefoot, and they should never be on flip-flops on the playground. If you find custodians, you know, if you find A needle in a garbage can or on the floor, don't pick it up with your bare hands. Make sure you use a tongs or mechanical device to pick it up and put it into a sharps container if you have those. If you don't have that, at least use a puncture-proof container with a lid on it to put it in there so that, no one else is going to get poked by that. Always wear your personal protective equipment when you're responding to a blood incident. So minimally, that's gloves. If there's squirting going on, maybe eye protection and a mask. Law enforcement, if you wind up going into areas where there's copious amounts of blood, you have to wear your white biohazard suit and then your footy things. And then once you're out of that area, you want to remove that, wash, and then put them in the biohazard bag for proper disposal. You never want to just go out and get into your squad car and go home and that type of stuff. You know that, but you're going to track that stuff. Okay, sorry for going through that kind of quick. Any questions on bloodborne? I went through that really quick, but most of you have training on
Who won,
bloodborne.
Barb?
Yes?
Who won the game?
I don't know. I think it was the middle team. How many did you have left? 3.
I got 4. 1,
You-
3, 4. That's
You
all I
went and got one.
No, we only got 3.
Okay. How many do you have? 1. Well, they lost.
I already.
Okay.
Losers.
Losers. They're the weakest. I want to close and just tell you, in this year, I just want to, in closing, remind you for another year to choose safety, not because you have to, but because you want to. And when you can do that, the lives, you've reached the pinnacle of safety success, and your life and the lives of those around you will be better for it. I'd like to share one last hero story, and heroes don't always wear capes, and a lot of them are pretty ordinary people, just like some of you sitting in this room today. And I want to tell you about a man named Joel. And Joel is the head of maintenance at one of my very small school districts. And he and I were doing a safety inspection last fall, walking around the building, and we were just catching up on each other's lives. He told me about his daughter that got married. We shared deer hunting stories, and then we were talking about just the general situation with kids nowadays. With the school shootings and the violence and the thing culture that we're starting to see. And he told me, he said, Barb, a few years ago we had a student that was in our school here and she didn't quite fit in. And he said, I kind of felt sorry for her and I always made time to talk to her and ask her how her day was and little things like that. And he said last fall she graduated and then that spring and then the following fall she was killed in a car accident. And the day after the car crash, her dad called me and he asked me if I would be a pallbearer at her funeral. And at this point, Joel looked at me with tears in his eyes and he asked me to excuse him for getting a little emotional. And after swallowing hard, he said, her dad told me that he knew she'd want me to be a pallbearer because she had once told him, Dad, if anything ever happens to you, I want Joel to be my dad. And after a brief pause where my eyes filled with tears, he told me, he goes, Barb, I never knew that. And it took her dying for me to find out. He said, kindness really matters. I didn't think I was doing anything special. I treat all the kids that way. And that story so touched me. I shared it with my brother who's a teacher, my daughter who's a teacher, my son who's a priest. And they shared it with their staff and with their coworkers. And my brother called me a couple weeks later and he goes, Barb, I just want to let you know I shared that story with my college comp class, their juniors and seniors. And he goes, when I got done, he said, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Juniors and seniors got tears in their eyes because they were so familiar with what that girl went through that nobody cared. And how much these young people are missing love and kindness And they're craving it in our world today, and some of us are seeking them in the wrong places. And Joel is doing a hero's work in a small school in a small town in nowhere, Minnesota. And his kindness is making a difference in the lives of those he meets and those he serves. And it's affecting more than one girl who didn't quite fit in. And I think this story is a story worth sharing, and it's got a legacy to teach us all that kindness matters. And when all is said and done, and we're at the end of our life, hopefully not because of a workplace accident, we're lying on our deathbed, the only thing that is going to matter is the people we've loved and those who have loved us back. And we're not going to say, gosh, I wish I would have spent one more day at work. We're going to say, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. I wish I would have let my family know that I cared about them more often. We assume people know that we care about them, and you know what, they don't. And we need to be conscious about telling them that. And we need to show the people in our lives that we love them by our words and our deeds. And we do that by working safely. And we do that by going home to them every night in a whole manner, the way you went to work. And so my prayer for you guys this year is that you all think about your safety, you all look for each other, you all say something when you see somebody doing something unsafe. And I see all your bright faces here next year.